Is we had testimony yesterday that there were many intelligence reports leading up to 9/11 and actual plots uncovered to use aircraft as missiles. Do you feel that the system set up to provide to you as Secretary of Transportation the latest intelligence bearing on your responsibilities, such as that subject, was adequate before 9/11? If not, have measures been taken to see that you are provided with the best possible product on a daily basis as to threats to the broad range of transportation assets under your purview? Could you comment on before and after?
Well, I do get a daily briefing, intelligence briefing, and I did during that time period prior to the 11th of September and subsequent to the 11th of September. And there's no doubt that the nature of the intelligence data has improved. And but again, there was nothing in those intelligence reports that would have been specific to anything that happened on the 11th of September. There was nothing in the preceding time period about aircraft being used as a weapon or of any other terrorist types of activities of that nature. And but I do get briefings, and I think that since the 11th of September 2001, the nature of the briefings have improved.
Just to follow up, Mr. Secretary, given the fact that there were in the preceding couple of years about a half a dozen novels and movies about hijackings being used as weapons, and the fact that there were reports floating around in the intelligence community, did you personally think that was a possibility, that it could have happened, or was, when it happened, did this take you totally by surprise? Because yesterday we had testimony from the former FAA administrator that, in effect, it never entered her mind.
Well, I would have to again say that I had no thought of the airplane being used as a weapon. I think our concentration was more on hijackings, and most of the hijackings as they occur in an overseas setting, or the hijacking, if it were to be a domestic one, was for the person to take over the aircraft, to have that aircraft transport them to some other place. But it wasn't, but I don't think we ever thought of an airplane being used as a missile.
Given that there was so much intelligence, not of specific plots, but of the possibility and the fact that some terrorists had in fact started planning, wouldn't you view it as a failure of our intelligence community not to tell the Secretary of Transportation that there was such a conceivable threat that the people like the Coast Guard and FAA should be thinking about?
We had no information of that nature at all, and as to whether that was a failure of the intelligence agencies, I think it would have been just, even for them, hard to imagine.
Thank you.
We recognize your time constraints. We have two more commissioners.
Absolutely.
Questions, Commissioner Gorelick and then Commissioner Fielding.
Secretary Mineta, again, thank you for being here. We all know that in the spring and summer of 2001, the intelligence community was putting out reports of a, I would say, near frantic level, suggesting that we were expecting there to be some type of terrorist attack somewhere in the world. It is clear we didn't know where, we didn't know the modality, but a very high level of concern. So my first question to you, and I'll just give them to you all at once, is one, were you called to any meeting or summoned at a cabinet level, or was there any sort of cross-functional group put together across the government to say, what can we do as a government to respond to this very heightened level of intelligence warning that we are getting generally? Second, even though in response to Commissioner Lehman's questions, you've indicated that this particular modality of attack was not made known to you, clearly hijackings and use of aircraft, or bombs on aircraft, were a favorite tool, if you will, of terrorists. Did you yourself do anything within the agencies under your control to seek out mechanisms for being on alert and for heightening our security in this period of reporting? What did you know? What was anyone telling you, and what did you do in response?
Well, first of all, on the first question, I would say no, that we had no meetings of an interagency nature, given the nature of intelligence that you're describing. I think most of the response at that time was to the what you might call the chatter, because the chatter is just really increased communication between people, but nothing specific as to the nature of the kind of attack that might be coming. We're at orange level now, and what prompted that was, again, increased chatter, but it wasn't anything specific about the nature of what the threat might be.
Well, let me just contrast perhaps the chatter, the same kind of chatter level in right in advance of the millennium. As I understand it, that information was widely disseminated in the government. There were cabinet level and sub-cabinet level meetings, and each agency essentially surged to do what they could to harden our country against attacks. Now, clearly, when you don't know where the attack is coming from or what mode will be used, it's difficult. But what I'm asking essentially is, did this higher level of chatter, the what I believe to be a frantic quality to the intelligence warnings, result in any action across the government, and particularly in the area of transportation? I take it your answer to that is no.
That's correct.
Commissioner Fielding?
Mr. Chairman, I would like a further explanation of the division of responsibility between the FAA and NORAD on the morning of 9/11, because there seems to be some confusion about that. I'd like the Secretary's views, but I'd be very happy in respect of his time to submit that in writing to him.
All right. I'll submit that for in writing.
Secretary, thank you very much.
Very well. Thank you very much to the Commission.
Mr. Chairman,
Hamilton.
I just wanted to be recognized for a moment to comment on a headline, really, in the Washington Post that appeared this morning. The headline states that and I'm quoting it now, new panel, independent of 9/11 commission is sought. End of quote. And I want to observe that I don't see how it's possible to get that headline out of the article. And the article really does not say anything at all about a separate panel. When I first saw the headline, it occurred to me that maybe I had attended a different meeting yesterday than the Washington Post reporters and headline writers had attended. But I hope that the Post will see fit to prominently correct that headline, which is quite erroneous.
Thank you very much. I would certainly agree. Now I'd like to have Major General Craig McKinley, Commander 1st Air Force, Continental U.S. NORAD, here representing NORAD.
Governor Keane, Congressman Hamilton, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Combatant Commander, United States Northern Command, and North American Aerospace Defense Command, to provide testimony on the events surrounding September 11, 2001, when our nation was attacked from within by foreign terrorists using commercial aircraft as weapons of mass destruction. It is an honor to represent the thousands of men and women from the Air National Guard, the active duty forces, and the Air Force Reserve still serving around the clock defending America from further attacks in support of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. I personally was inside the Pentagon on September 11th, and I personally know what it feels like to be attacked by hostile forces. Although over 18 months have passed since that tragic day, our vigilance remains focused. We have flown almost 30,000 airborne sorties in support of Operation Noble Eagle in the continental United States alone. Every day, Americans and Canadians work side by side in NORAD to defend North America. We have forged unprecedented relationships within the U.S. government with federal agencies to strengthen our ability to detect and defend against further attempts to harm our nation from the air. We are now partnered with the new United States Northern Command to extend and perfect our mission in both homeland defense as well as civil support missions. We are proud to be a part of this team focused on defending our nation against all threats and supporting our government in its primary role of protecting its citizens. 1st Air Force is a subordinate command of Air Combat Command and is responsible to the North American Aerospace Defense Commander for the execution of the air defense mission to protect our nation. 1st Air Force, as NORAD's continental United States NORAD region, is responsible for the air defense of the continental United States under the NORAD agreements. I personally took command of 1st Air Force in the continental United States NORAD region on August 1st of 2002, and then became the Joint Force Air Component Commander for General Eberhart. This was 11 months after the attacks. I'm pleased to say today that when I saw the nature of your questions, that I asked General Eberhart's permission and received it to invite Major General retired Larry Arnold, the past commander of 1st Air Force, and the commander on the day of the attacks that led the command through those trying days during and after the event. He is with us today and has volunteered to be part of this commission's hearings. I also asked for probably the best subject matter expert I could find on the chronology, the series of events that's so vital to this commission, to be with us today with your concurrence to walk us through the NORAD timeline. I also have with me today Major Don Arias to show you the human nature of this. Don's brother Adam was killed in the South Tower too. He was talking to his brother at 8:59 on the 11th of September 01. Major Arias is our public affairs officer. Please stand up, Don. I'd like to thank the commission staff, especially Miles Cara, for his help in preparing for this. The committee has posed many questions regarding the events surrounding the 9/11 attacks. Our intention is to provide the chronology first of the events leading up to September 11th, as well as taking your questions to give you a detailed look at how NORAD's response was made on 9/11 and any subsequent questions you may have on our posture since. Mr. Commissioner, that concludes my formal statement. The rest will be provided for the record. And with your indulgence, sir, I'd like Colonel Retired Scott, Alan Scott, to walk you through the timeline.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. General Arnold and I were together that day on September the 11th. What I will walk you through here is a chronology of the attacks, and I've presented it in a matrix form. And the only thing I lay claim to is having studied all of the attacks and how they were interwoven together. This was not a linear sequence of events where one attack began and ended, and then a second attack began and ended. This was a coordinated, well-planned attack. We had multiple airplanes in the air. The fog and friction of war was evident everywhere in the country, both on the civil side as well as the military side. And this hopefully will show you how those interwoven events came about. And I will tell you that the times on this chart come from our logs. The time on the chart is the time that's in the log. It may not be the exact time the event happened. It may be the time when the log keeper was advised or became aware of the event. The first thing that happened in the morning related to, thank you, Don, related to the events at 8:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is when American Airlines 11 took off out of Boston. American Airlines 11 was a 767, and it was headed, I believe, to Los Angeles. 14 minutes later, also coming out of Boston Logan, United Airlines 175, 757, also headed to Los Angeles, took off out of Boston, and initially took roughly the same ground track as American 11. 3 minutes later, American Airlines 77 took off out of Dulles here in Washington, also headed to Los Angeles, and also a 757, and proceeded westbound toward the West Coast. So now the first three airplanes are airborne together. The first time that anything untoward, and this was gleaned from FAA response, that anything out of the ordinary happened was at 8:20, when the electronic transponder in American Airlines 11 blinked off, if you will, just disappeared from the screen. Obviously, the terrorists turned that transponder off, and that airplane, although it did not disappear from the radar scope, it became a much, much more difficult target to discern for the controllers, who now only could look at the primary radar return off the airplane. That was at 8:20. At 8:40 in our logs is the first occasion where the FAA is reporting a possible hijacking of American Airlines Flight 11. And the initial response to us at that time was a possible hijacking. It had not been confirmed. At that same moment, the F-15 alert aircraft at Otis Air Force Base, Massachusetts, about 153 miles away, were placed immediately on battle stations by the Northeast Air Defense Sector commander. At 8:43, as this is going on, the fourth airplane, United 93, takes off out of Newark, New Jersey. It's a 757. It is headed for San Francisco. At 8:46, our next log event, we get the last, and by the way, much of this radar data for these primary targets was not seen that day. It was reconstructed days later by the 84th Radar Evaluation Squadron and other agencies like it, who are professionals at going back and looking at radar tapes, and then given that they're loaded with knowledge after the fact, they can go and find things that perhaps were not visible during the event itself. At 8:46, the last data near the Trade Center, 8:46, the first impact on the Trade Center. At that minute is when the Otis F-15s were scrambled, and again, they were 153 miles away. And that scramble came, and General Arnold, I'm sure, can address this, based on a conversation between the Northeast Sector Commander and himself. Those F-15s were airborne in 6 minutes. That is well inside the time that is allowed for them to get airborne. But because they were on battle stations, the pilots were in the cockpits ready to start engines, that scramble time was shortened by a significant amount of time. At 8:53, that's a minute later, in the radar reconstruction, we're now picking up the primary radar contacts off of the F-15s out of Otis. At 8:57, which is 7 minutes after the first impact, is, according to our logs, when the FAA reports the first impact. And about this time is when CNN coverage to the general public is beginning to appear on the TV, not of the impact, but of the burning tower shortly thereafter. So you can see what in the military, I'm sure you've heard us talk to the fog and friction of war, and as the intensity increases, the lag tends to also increase for how quickly information gets passed. 9:02, United 175, the second airplane, which, by the way, never turned off its transponder before impact, crashes into the North Tower at 9:02. The distance of those fighters, which had been scrambled out of Otis, at that particular point, they were still 71 miles away, about 8 minutes out, and going very fast. At 9:05, FAA reports a possible hijack of United 175. Again, that's 3 minutes after the impact in the tower, is how long it is taking now the information to flow through the system to the command and control agencies, and through the command and control agencies to the pilots in the cockpit. At 9:09, Langley F-16s are directed to battle stations, just based on the general situation and the breaking news and the general, the developing feeling about what's going on. And about that same time, way out in the west, is when America 77, which in the meantime has turned off its transponder and turned left back toward Washington, appears back in radar coverage. And my understanding is the FAA controllers now are beginning to pick up primary skin paints on an airplane, and they don't know exactly whether that is 77, and they're asking a lot of people whether it is, including a C-130 that's westbound toward Ohio. At 9:11, FAA reports a crash into the South Tower. You can see now that lag time has increased from 7 minutes from impact to report. Now it's 9 minutes from impact to report. You can only imagine what's going on the floors of the control centers around the country. At 9:11, I just mentioned that, 9:16, now FAA reports a possible hijack of United Flight 93, which is out in the Ohio area. But that's the last flight that is going to impact the ground. At 9:24, the FAA reports a possible hijack of 77. That's sometime after they had been tracking this primary target. And at that moment as well is when the Langley F-16s were scrambled out of Langley. At 9:25, America 77 is reported heading toward Washington, D.C., not exactly precise information, just general information across the chat logs. 9:27, Boston FAA reports a fifth aircraft missing, Delta Flight 89, and many people have never heard of Delta Flight 89. We call that the first red herring of the day because there were a number of reported possible hijackings that unfolded over the hours immediately following the actual attacks. Delta 89 was not hijacked, enters the system, increases the fog and friction, if you will, as we begin to look for that. But he lands about 7 or 8 minutes later and clears out of the system. At 9:30, the Langley F-16s are airborne. They're 105 miles away from the Washington area. 9:34, through chat, FAA is unable to precisely locate American Airlines Flight 77. 9:35, F-16s are reported airborne, and many times reported airborne is not exactly when they took off, it's just when the report came down that they were airborne. At 9:37, we have the last radar data near the Pentagon, and 9:40, immediately following that, is when 93 up north turns its transponder off out in the west toward Ohio and begins a left turn back toward the east. At 9:49, FAA reports that Delta 89, which had been reported as missing, is now reported as a possible hijacking. So again, he is, I'm sorry, 9:41. Again, he is in the system. He's kind of a red herring for us. Now, the only thing that I would point out on this chart is this says 9:43, American Airlines 77 impacts the Pentagon. The timeline on the impact on the Pentagon was changed to 9:37. 9:43 is the time that was reported that day. It was the time we used, and it took about 2 weeks to discover in the parking lot of the Pentagon this entry camera for the parking lot, which happened to be oriented toward the Pentagon at the time of impact. And the recorded time is 9:37. And that's why the timeline went from 9:43 to 9:37, because it is the best documented evidence for the impact time that we have. Getting toward the end now, 9:47 is when Delta 89 clears the system by landing in Cleveland. So he is not a hijack. Lots of things are going on now in the system as the sectors begin to call both units that are part of 1st Air Force and NORAD, as well as units that have nothing to do with us. We're beginning to call everyone now. And the 103rd Air Control Squadron, for instance, stationed in Connecticut, is an air control squadron, a radar squadron. And they got their radar online, operational, and began to link their radar picture into the Northeast system. They are not normally part of NORAD. This is really the initial part of a huge push the rest of that day to link as many radars in on the interior as we can and to get as many fighters on alert as we can. At 10:02, United 93, last radar data, and the estimated impact time for United 93 is 10:03. At 10:07, FAA reports there may be a bomb on board 93. That's 4 minutes after the impact. At 10:15, they report that it's crashed, and you can see now that fog and friction lag time has increased from 7 minutes to 9 minutes to 15 minutes because of the level of activities that are going on. And there are notations here about other airplanes as we begin to divert other airplanes that are just out were intended for training that day. We're picking up the phone, calling Syracuse, the Air National Guard. They're beginning to get flights airborne. They're beginning to arm whatever those aircraft with whatever weapons they have handy so we can posture that defense. That is how the timeline unfolded. As you can see, it is a fabric of interwoven actions. This was not just a linear event. So lots of things going on, lots of activities, and lots of C2 centers. Sir, that completes my piece.
Mr. Chairman, we thought right up front we put that on the record so that we can have that as a departure point for your questions. I again caveat by saying that this is the North American Aerospace Defense Command and Continental NORAD region timeline. Other agencies may have other logs that may have different times, but this is the best and most accurate data that we could piece together for your commission, sir. With that, I open up to questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Benvenisti.
Good morning, gentlemen. First, I would like to personally commend each of you and the dedicated men and women who serve our nation through NORAD. I'd like to explain to you what you probably know already, and that is that our mandate as a commission is to provide the most detailed and accurate exposition in our final report of what occurred leading up to the 9/11 tragedy and the events subsequent thereto. And so please understand that our questions may be very pointed. We mean no disrespect, but we have our mission as well. Now, General McKinley, is it fair to say that the mission and the primary responsibility of NORAD is to defend our homeland and our citizens against air attack.
On the day of September 11, 2001, our mission was to defend North America, to surveil, to intercept, to identify, and if necessary to destroy those targets which we were posturing were going to come from outside our country. In fact, that tracks originating over the landmass of the United States were identified friendly by origin. Therefore, those alert sites that were positioned on the morning of September 11th were looking out primarily on our coasts at the Air Defense Identification Zone, which extends outwards of 100 to 200 miles off our shore. So that was the main focus of NORAD at the time.
I asked you about your responsibility, sir, and I ask you again whether it was not your responsibility as NORAD to protect the United States and its citizens against air attack.
It is, and it was, and I would just caveat your comment by saying that our mission was, at that time, not designed to take internal FAA radar data to track or to identify tracks originating within our borders. It was to look outward as a Cold War vestige, primarily developed during the Cold War to protect against Soviet long-range bomber penetration of our intercept zone.
Well, I think, sir, you have used a good term, not good for the United States, but accurate in terms of the vestigial mandate operationally to look outward toward the borders rather than inward. And by vestigial, you mean, I'm sure, as a result of our decades of confrontation with the former Soviet Union.
Correct, sir.
And so on the day of September 11th, if you can see these dots, I know it may be difficult to see, NORAD was positioned in a perimeter around the United States, but nothing in the central region, nothing on the border with Canada.
That's correct, sir.
Now, let me ask you, sir, whether the concept of terrorists using an airplane as a weapon was something unknown to the intelligence community on September 10th, 2001.
Very good question, and I asked.
Thank you.
I asked our staff to provide me some data on what they had that morning. As I said, General Arnold was at the helm that morning. But basically, the comments I received from my staff was that there was no intelligence indication at any level within NORAD or DOD of a terrorist threat to commercial aviation prior to the attacks. And information from the daily Joint Chiefs Intelligence Report on the morning of September 11th indicated no specific dangers or threats within the country.
My question, sir, and I mean no disrespect, but we'll save time if you listen to what I ask you. My question is, the concept of terrorists using airplanes as weapons was not something which was unknown to the U.S. intelligence community on September 10th, 2001. Isn't that fair to say?
I'd like the intelligence community to address that. I would find it hard to believe that they hadn't speculated against that, but it was unavailable to us at the time.
Well, let's start, for example, with September 12th, 1994. A Cessna 150L crashed into the south lawn of the White House, barely missing the building and killing the pilot. Similarly, in December of 1994, an Algerian armed Islamic group of terrorists hijacked an Air France flight in Algiers and threatened to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. In October of 1996, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an Iranian plot to hijack a Japanese plane over Israel and crash it into Tel Aviv. In August of 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. The information was passed on to the FBI and the FAA. In September of 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that Osama bin Laden's next operation could possibly involve flying an aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport and detonating it. In August 2001, the intelligence community obtained information regarding a plot to either bomb the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi from an airplane or crash an airplane into it. In addition, in the Atlanta Olympics, the United States government and the Department of Justice and my colleague, Jamie Gorelick, were involved in planning against possible terrorist attacks at the Olympics, which included the potential of an aircraft flying into the stadium. In July 2001, the G8 summit in Genoa, attended by our president. Among the measures that were taken were positioning surface-to-air missiles, ringing Genoa, closing the Genoa airport, and restricting all airspace over Genoa. Was not this information, sir, available to NORAD as of September 11th, 2001?
It's obvious by your categorization that those events all took place and that NORAD had that information. I would only add, sir, that the intelligence data that we postured our forces for and the training and the tactics and the procedures that we used to prepare our missions for support of the combatant commander of NORAD had hijacking as a primary intercept tactic. And we have some of the finest fighter pilots, as you know, in the world, who are some of the best people in the world, who can do their mission extremely well. But we had not postured prior to September 11, 2001 for the scenario that took place that day.
Well, obviously, it would be hard to imagine posturing for the exact scenario, but isn't it a fact, sir, that prior to September 11, 2001, NORAD had already in the works plans to simulate in an exercise a simultaneous hijacking of two planes in the United States?
Colonel Scott, do you have any data on that? I'm not aware of that, sir. I was not present at the time.
That was Operation Amalgam Virgo.
Yes, sir. Specifically, Operation Amalgam Virgo, which I was involved in before I retired, was a scenario using a third world uninhabited aerial vehicle launched off a rogue freighter in the Gulf of Mexico. General Arnold can back me up. At the time, one of our greatest concerns was the proliferation of cruise missile technology and the ability for terrorist groups to get that technology, get it close enough to our shores to launch it. In fact, this exercise, we used actual drone, MQM-107 drones, which are about the size of a cruise missile, to exercise our fighters and our radars in a Gulf of Mexico scenario.
You're referring to Amalgam 01, are you not?
Yes, sir. Amalgam.
I'm referring to Amalgam 02, which was in the planning stages prior to September 11th, 2001, sir. Is that correct?
That was after I retired, and I was not involved in 02.
And will you accept that the exercise involved a simultaneous hijacking scenario?
I was not involved in 02.
Sir, I do have some information on 02, if you'd allow me to read it for the record.
Please.
Amalgam Virgo, in general, 02, was an exercise created to focus on peacetime and contingency NORAD missions. One of the peacetime scenarios that is and has been a NORAD mission for years is support to other government departments. Within this mission falls hijackings. Creativity of the designer aside, prior to 9/11, hijack motivations were based on political objectives, i.e. asylum or release of captured prisoners or political figures. Threats of killing hostages or crashing were left to the scriptwriters to invoke creativity and broaden the required response for players.
Well, isn't that a bit fatuous given the specific information that I've given you? It wasn't in the minds of scriptwriters when the Algerians had actually hijacked the plane which they were attempting to fly into the Eiffel Tower, and all of the other scenarios which I've mentioned to you. I don't mean to argue with you, but my question is, sir, given the awareness of the terrorists' use of planes as weapons, how was it that NORAD was still focusing outward and protecting the United States against attacks from the Soviet Union or elsewhere, and was not better prepared to defend against the hijacking scenarios of a commercial jet laden with fuel used as a weapon to target citizens of the United States? When you say our training, our mission was vestigial, I think you said it in an encapsulated form, but would you agree that on the basis of the information available that there could have been better preparedness by NORAD to meet this threat?
In retrospect, sir, I think I would agree with your comment.
With respect to the bases that were available for protecting the East Coast, and Colonel Scott has gone through the scrambling of aircraft, I wanted to focus just on one flight, Flight 77, and then Secretary Lehman will ask you some more specific questions. With respect to Flight 77, sir, you testified previously before the House Armed Services Committee, and you were, I'm sorry, General Eberhardt was questioned. You were familiar with his testimony, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He was questioned about Flight 77, and because of the use of Langley Air Base, which is 105 miles from our capital, as opposed to, say, Andrews Air Force Base, which is in the neighborhood, the question arises again about the positioning and the thought behind the positioning of fighter planes to protect our capital in an enhanced terrorist threat situation such as existed on September 10th, 2002. Let me ask you about Flight 77 again. The question was, the timeline that we've been given is that at 8:55 on September 11, American Airlines Flight 77 began turning east, away from its intended course, and at 9:10, Flight 77 was detected by the FAA radar over West Virginia, heading east. That was after the two planes had already struck the Trade Center tower. Is that correct, Colonel Scott?
Yes, sir.
Now, 15 minutes later, at 9:25, the FAA notified NORAD, according to the statement, that Flight 77 was headed toward Washington. Was that the first notification, 9:25, that NORAD or DOD had that Flight 77 was probably hijacked? And if it was, do you know why it took 15 minutes for the FAA to notify NORAD? General Eberhardt said, sir, there's one minor difference. I saw it as 9:24, which you do as well, that we were notified, and that's the first notification that we received. Do you know if that was the first notification to DOD? Yes, sir, that's the first documented notification that we received. And I want to focus on the word documented because it's very important for us to know when NORAD actually received notification, given the fact that planes had already crashed into the World Trade Center, and given, I'm sure, the assumption that these were terrorist acts and there could be more coming, more planes coming. Is it in fact correct, sir, that the first notification of any type that NORAD received was not until 9/24 with respect to Flight 77?
With your concurrence, sir, I'd like to ask General Arnold to address that. He was on the floor that morning.
Thank you.
Simple answer to your question is I believe that to be a fact. 9/24 is the first time that we had been advised of American 77 as a possible hijacked airplane. Our focus, you got to remember that there's a lot of other things going on simultaneous here, was on United 93, which was being pointed out to us very aggressively, I might say, by the FAA. Because of our radars looking outward and not inward, the only way for us to know where anything was for the FAA to pass along that information to us.
Well, is it not the case, General Arnold, that there was an open line established between FAA, NORAD, and other agencies, including CIA and FBI, that morning?
Well, I wasn't on that line at that particular time, if that were the case. In fact, there's an open line established between our sectors at really the tactical level, where they're controlling the aircraft, talking to the FAA controllers from time to time. We did not have an open line at that time with the FAA. That is not accurate.
You did not. You were not. NORAD was not in contact by...
The Continental United States NORAD region, my headquarters, were responsible for the Continental United States Air Defense, did not have an open line with the FAA at that time.
Was there some NORAD office that had an open line with the FAA? Excuse me, let me finish my question, please. Was there some NORAD office, and you'll forgive us because we had asked for this information prior to the hearing from FAA and did not receive it. But we are advised that there was indeed an open line between either the NET or some other name given to essentially an ongoing conference whereunder in real time FAA was providing information as it received it immediately after the first crash into the towers, we're told, with respect to each of the events that were ongoing of any remarkable nature. I see General McKinley is nodding.
I'd like to, if I may, address this based on my research and review for this commission. It's my understanding that the FAA was in contact with our Northeast Air Defense Sector at Rome, New York, understanding the relationship of how we defend North America from threats. NORAD located in Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs. Our Continental NORAD region, our Air Operations Center located at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. That's where the Joint Force Air Component Commander resides. And then we have 3 sectors based on the size and volume of our country that handle that. It is my understanding from talking with both FAA and our supervisors at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome that those lines were open and that they were discussing these issues.
So is it fair to say that at least the NORAD personnel in Rome, New York, had information available to it in real time once it saw, when we were advised that this occurred at approximately 9:02, which would have been 22 minutes earlier, that Flight 77 first was observed deviating from its course, something in which, in the context of what was going on that day, would be quite interesting, if not remarkable.
Got any comments?
Sir, I think it's also important to understand that like the CONUS region, the FAA is also broken down into subordinate command and control centers as well. I know that the Boston Center was talking directly to the Northeast Sector. I don't believe Flight 77 was in Boston Center's airspace. They were in Cleveland.
I think the FAA can report accurately on this, but I believe 77 was in Cleveland Center airspace when it developed the problem, where they lost its radar image. And I believe, and the FAA again can testify better to this, they would take action based on losing that identification in Cleveland.
Well, actually, I think, according to the information that we have, the first indication was not a loss of radar contact, but rather a course deviation with respect to Flight 77. Now, I don't mean to take up any more time on this because we're going to want to follow up on all of this information in great detail, but let me ask whether there is regularly made a tape recording of these open line communications.
Not to my knowledge.
Not to my knowledge.
That does FAA, to your knowledge, keep a recording of these crisis situations?
I am unaware, but I would certainly direct that to them, please.
To the best of your knowledge, you don't have anything further to shed light on when you first learned, NORAD, first learned of Flight 77's probable hijack status prior to 9:24 a.m.
I can provide that for the record. I do not have any further knowledge at this time.
We would ask that you do so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have some other questions after.
Secretary Lehman.
Thank you, Generals. I would also like to echo my colleague's expression of great admiration for you and your predecessor, your command, and your pilots, even though they might require long runways to land.
We understand.
One of the most serious responsibilities we have, in addition to air security, is identifying the real dysfunctions in our intelligence system that contributed to the tragedy. And we had prior, as you know, to your testimony, Secretary Mineta, who indicated, despite the fact of this long litany of events and intelligence reports of the growing probability that aircraft would be used as weapons, nothing ever got to him, and nothing apparently got to you, and I assume, General Arnold, nothing got to you. This would seem to be a pretty significant failure of our system, because it exists to provide product precisely to you, the most important users tasked with defending us. So I'd like to ask, we'll provide you a copy of this, which is from the Joint Inquiry Staff Statement. If you could give us your studied assessment of what went wrong in the way you interact with, your command interacts with the intelligence community, and why the product did not get to you. These were pretty dramatic events, facts, and intelligence reports. It would be very helpful to us to have your assessment as a customer of the system to what went so seriously wrong that you were still only looking out. There is another an issue that I would ask perhaps General Arnold to address, because there's a great deal of unease and distress, I think, understandably, among many of the families that somehow those aircraft could have been shot down if people had not made mistakes. And I wonder if you would just take us through each flight, given the posture that NORAD was in at the time, which was national policy and not whatever, based on erroneous intelligence perhaps, but given that posture, and given the times that NORAD was notified of the deviation from schedule and the possibility of hijacking, could the aircraft on alert, for instance, at Otis, have intercepted? And then if you could also take us through 77 and 93 as well with the F-16s, and if you would, tell us as you take us through what the armament was on the F-15s and on the F-16s that were scrambled against 77 and 93.
Thank you, sir, and I'll try to do that to the best of my ability. And perhaps General McKinley has some data that he could shed light on, because I have been retired a little while and don't have access to the staff for some of the very specifics on that, but I will try to do my best. As you know through previous testimony from General Eberhardt to Congress, we were in the middle of a NORAD exercise at that particular time. Which means that basically our entire staff was focused on being able to do the Air Operations Center mission, which was our job to do. We had just come out of a video teleconference with the NORAD staff and with our folks at that particular time when I was handed a note that we had a possible hijacking in Boston Center. And it had come from the Northeast Air Defense Commander, Colonel Bob Marr, who's commander up there. And he had requested that I call him immediately. And I was upstairs in our facility, immediately went downstairs, picked up the phone, asking on the way to my staff, is this part of the exercise? Because quite honestly and frankly, we do hijacking scenarios as we go through these exercises from time to time. But I realized that it was not, this was real life. And I also remember as I went downstairs, before I even talked to him, it had been a long time since we'd had a hijacking, but that the fact that we'd reviewed the procedures of what it is that we do for a hijacking, because we were in the middle of an exercise. So we were pretty well familiar with those procedures, and of course we have our own checklist that we follow. As I picked up the phone, Bob told me that Boston Center had called possible hijacking within the system. He'd put the aircraft at Otis on battle stations, wanted permission to scramble them. I told him to go ahead and scramble the airplanes and we'd get permission later. And the reason for that is that the procedure, hijacking, is a law enforcement issue, as is everything that takes off from within the United States. And only law enforcement can request assistance from the military, which they did in this particular case. The route, if you follow the book, is that they go to the duty officer of the National Military Command Center, who in turn makes an inquiry to NORAD for the availability of fighters, who then gets permission from someone representing the Secretary of Defense. Once that is approved, then we scramble aircraft. We didn't wait for that. We scrambled the aircraft, told them to get airborne, and we would seek clearances later. I picked up the phone, called NORAD, whose battle staff was in place because of the exercise, talked to the deputy commander for operations. He said, I understand, and we'll call the Pentagon for those particular clearances. It was simultaneous almost with that decision that we had made that I'm looking at the TV monitor of the news network and see a smoking hole in the North Tower of what turned out to be the North Tower of the World Trade Center, wondering, what is this? And like many of us involved in that, does it have anything to do with this particular incident, which we didn't think it did, because we're talking Boston Center and we're not thinking of the immediate New York metropolitan area. Shortly after that, of course, our airplanes became airborne after that. It just so happens that Colonel Duffy, who was a pilot of that first F-15, had been involved in some conversation because there was, as the telephone calls were made, he was aware that there was a hijacking in the system, and it was kind of interesting because he had concluded that that indeed might have been that airplane itself, and elected to hit the afterburner and to speed up his way towards New York. Excuse me. It was then, very shortly thereafter, that we saw on television the second airplane, the United 175, crash into the South Tower, and the first thing that I think most of us thought was this a rerun of the first event, and then it turned out to be the second event. We had no warning of that whatsoever. There was, from my staff, a call. In fact, that airplane was called hijacked, or possibly hijacked later on, which as General McKinley referred to as the fog of friction of war, actually caused further confusion. because we were not aware that which aircraft had actually crashed into the towers. We just knew that by now we have 2 airplanes that have crashed into the towers. We have 2 airplanes that are called hijacked. Again, we are still minutes away. I think the record said 8 minutes away from New York City with F-15s that are moving very rapidly in that direction. Now we have, before I get to 77, if it were, we get a call of United Flight 93.
Well, before you go to that, I just wanted to just make clear, there was no possibility, given the lateness with which you were notified from FAA of a possible hijacking, that those airplanes in full afterburner flying supersonic could have gotten there in time to intercept either of those 2 flights. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. The first aircraft, of course, American 11, crashed before our interceptors were airborne. We ordered the scramble almost simultaneously. Our records show the same minute. I'm not even sure which occurred first, but it was almost simultaneous that we ordered the scramble of the aircraft, and the impact into the North Tower had occurred. And so by the time even the pilot accelerating to 1.5 Mach, moving pretty fast, was still 8 minutes out by the time the second aircraft had crashed into the tower. And though when the second aircraft crashed in the tower, by now, I think Secretary Mandetta said this becomes a pattern. Certainly, I'd like to tell you that I was absolutely certain at that time that we were under attack, but I was not absolutely certain we were under attack at that particular time. But we knew that this pattern had to be dealt with at that particular time. And then very shortly thereafter, we got a call on the United 93 flight being a possible hijacking. And that aircraft, well, I don't know if you know, but it wandered around. That aircraft wandered around and flew up over the northern part of Pennsylvania and Ohio. Mixed in with this was a call about a Delta flight that was possibly hijacked. So now our focus is, we are under attack. What are we going to do in order to be in position to intercept another aircraft should it threaten someplace in the United States? That place, of course, we would not know. In the Northeast, at this particular time, we had no other aircraft available. The aircraft out of Otis had taken off. We looked at aircraft that were returning from a Michigan, they were Michigan Air National Guard aircraft, returning from the range, because at one time we thought either the Delta flight or the United 93 might pose a threat to Detroit. We tried to get airplanes airborne out of the Toledo Air National Guard at that particular time. Can you get anything airborne? Because we have this United 93 and this Delta flight, we need to intercept it and see what is going on with those particular aircraft. Syracuse, New York is Air National Guard unit. We inquired with them their ability to get airborne, and ultimately they did somewhat later at that particular time. And so in the record you see the time when we were notified of the American Flight 77 as being a possible hijack. And I can tell you that I did not know, and I don't believe anybody in the NORAD system knew where that airplane was. We were advised that it was possibly hijacked. And we had launched, at that, almost simultaneously with that, we launched the aircraft out of Langley to put them over top of Washington, D.C., not in response to American Airline 77, but really to put them in position in case United 93 were to head that way. They were the closest fighters that we had, and we started vectoring them to move towards the Washington, D.C. area.
They also go into burner?
No, sir.
Sir, they, based on their configuration, traveled at 0.98 Mach, roughly 575 knots, 660 miles per hour, about 10 nautical miles per minute.
If they had gone into burner, could they have gotten there in time to get 77?
I think if those aircraft had gotten airborne immediately, if we were operating under something other than peacetime rules where they could have turned immediately for Washington, D.C. and gone into burner, it is physically possible that they could have gotten over Washington, D.C.
Why did they head out to sea first?
Our standard, we have agreements with the FAA, and by the way, we're looking outward. This is an advantage to us. And so we have agreements for clearance. When we scramble an aircraft, there's a line that's picked up, and the FAA and everyone is on that line, and the aircraft take off, and they have a predetermined departure route. And, of course, it's out over water because our mission, unlike law enforcement's mission, is to protect things coming towards the United States. And I might even add, in all of our terrorist scenarios that we run, the aircraft, if we were to intercept an aircraft, it is usually always from outside the United States coming towards us. So our peacetime procedures are, again, to deconflict with civil aviation so as to not have endanger civil aviation in any particular way.
Secretary Lehman, also, if I may add, the complexity of the air traffic over the Northeast Corridor is so complex that to just launch fighters, as you know, sir, from your background, into that air traffic system can cause potential damage or mid-air collision. So we rely on the FAA to deconflict those corridors, and that is another reason why it vectored east originally.
The armament in the F-15s and the F-16s was?
The armament, as I recall, and General McKinley can correct me on that, we had full-up armament on all those aircraft with both radar and heat-seeking missiles as well as guns.
AIM-7, AIM-9.
Okay. So to continue with 77, it's fair to say if you had got a more timely notification from FAA, and particularly with regard to where it was heading, that those F-16s launched from Langley could possibly have gotten there before they hit the Pentagon?
It is certainly physically possible that they could have gotten into the area, and it's speculation as to whether we could have actually intercepted the aircraft by that time, because everything that we were doing, remember, was being relayed from the FAA.
Yeah.
We have no visibility on those aircraft, couldn't see, no radars, couldn't talk to our pilots. FAA did a marvelous job during that period of time in doing radio relays and assisting us in being able to
Now, if 93 had not crashed, would it not have been possible for the F-16s to have intercepted 93, and do you think they would have?
It was in our intent to intercept United Flight 93. And in fact, my own staff, we were orbiting now over Washington, D.C. By this time, and I was personally anxious to see what 93 was going to do, and our intent was to intercept it. But we decided to stay over Washington, D.C. because there was not that urgency, and if there were other aircraft coming from another quadrant, another vector, we would have been pulled off station, and we would not have been able to, there might have been an aircraft that popped up within the system closer that would have posed a larger threat to the Washington, D.C. area. So we elected to remain over D.C. until that aircraft was definitely coming towards us. And as you know, the brave men and women who took over that aircraft prevented us from making the awful decision which the young men that were flying those aircraft would live with for the rest of their lives if they had to do that.
Now, in a short answer, why with the previous attempt of a light plane to hit the White House wasn't Andrews Air Force Base with F-16s and Marine F-18s available part of the alert? And I understand I'd also like to have you comment on what the role of the Secret Service was in scrambling those F-16s.
Are you talking about
the Andrews
airplanes? It's my understanding that the Secret Service, obviously they worked with the 113th because President, Air Force One is located out at Andrews Air Force Base, so they had personal knowledge of those, of the people out there and the telephone number, and I cannot speculate whether they knew what we were doing or not, but in the urgency to get something done, they made a phone call to the 113th. I learned later, I did not know that at the time, and asked them to get anything they could airborne, and I think the quote was to protect the house.
And the 113th is the 113th Fighter Wing at Andrews, the District of Columbia Air National Guard F-16 wing.
Yeah, and not part of NORAD.
Now, you said that the clear delineation was you were looking outward, and to do anything inward, you had to get authorization from a law enforcement agency. And that is covered, as I understand it, by JCS Instruction 3610 on aircraft piracy. In that instruction, as I read it, which I believe is still in effect.
That's correct, sir.
You don't have any delegated authority to interdict. In fact, there's no mention of interdiction in it's purely an escort function. This is still in effect. Now, presumably, you're not following it to the letter, and I would like you to speak to what the chain of command is now. Who has authority to interdict, to shoot down? Where is it delegated, and are there published rules of engagement as to what criteria apply to make that decision?
So I'd be happy to answer that, and I thank General Arnold for his comments about the actual date. I appreciate him being here today. Quite frankly, sir, since September 11, 2001, the Department of Defense, United States Air Force, has put a lot of resources into what we call Operation Noble Eagle. As President Bush said, it's the second front in the war on terrorism. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've flown 30,000 sorties. In fact, overhead today, here, our Noble Eagle pilots are flying, in addition to being supplanted with ground-based air defense artillery. A lot of effort has gone into taking a look at the things that were not done right prior to prepare ourselves for the aftermath. And it is an honor for me to represent the men and women who do that. Quite frankly, our relationships began at 9/11 and the aftermath with General Arnold and our staff to work with the Federal Aviation Administration to bring in those radar facilities so that our controllers at our northeast, southeast, and western air defense sectors have visibility internally now, and that has been completed. In addition to seeing internally to the United States, we must be able to communicate to the pilots who fly our interceptor missions so that we can have clear lines of control back to our command element, General Eberhardt, in Colorado Springs.
Now, just to interrupt, on the radar visibility, are you dependent on the FAA radars, which can have very little capability in a non-transponder environment, or do you have the better air defense radar?
Sir, we try to put the best radars in effect for the mission. Most of those are FAA radars. Most of them are old radars, but they've been maintained properly, and we're actually putting Department of Defense people out to make sure those radars are calibrated for our mission. So therefore, we are using their radars. We are using air control squadrons, both active duty, guard, and reserve, to supplement those. We, in fact, use the United States Navy every chance we can because their Aegis cruisers are so capable that we link their pictures into our Air Combat Command Center at Tyndall. So we are doing the absolute best job with the resources we've been given to make sure that internal picture now is transparent to our air battle managers so that military controllers, when asked now, can pinpoint immediately an aircraft in distress, that we can find the nearest suitable fighter location, which I can say is substantial today. In open testimony, I'd not like to go into the details of the numbers of alert facilities, but it goes up and down depending on the threat. But it is internal now to the United States, which it wasn't on the 11th of September. So this capacity, this Operation Noble Eagle, which gives the military far more responsibility and latitude to do this mission now, has allowed us to be far more capable. And we have been involved in every airline incident that we have been asked to perform with the Federal Aviation Administration subsequent to 9/11, whether there be a disturbance on board, whether it be an aircraft emergency, whether it be to protect critical infrastructure, our major population centers, we are there.
To follow up on that, General Arnold, did you have authority to shoot down 93 when it was heading towards Washington, and where did you get it?
Yeah, a lot of discussion on that. Our intent on United 93, the simple answer is, to my knowledge, I did not have authority to shoot that aircraft down. We were informed after that airplane had hit the ground. That's a simple answer.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? You were informed of what after it hit the ground?
We were informed of presidential authority some 5 minutes after that aircraft had hit the ground, according to our record.
So you were given it after the fact, presidential authority to shoot it
To
down?
my knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you that in our discussion with the NORAD staff at that particular time, that we intended to intercept that aircraft, at some point in time attempt to deviate that aircraft away from the Washington, D.C. area. There was discussion at that particular time whether or not that aircraft would be shot down. But I did not know of presidential shoot-down authority until after that aircraft had crashed.
Mm-hmm. And General McKinley, could you take us to the present and where those authorities lie now?
Yes, sir. Subsequent to 9/11, the President delegated to the Secretary of Defense, delegated to the combatant commander of NORAD, and now United States Northern Command has the authority to declare a hostile target. Our fighter interceptors will be in position to accept that hostile declaration, and the clearance authorities will be passed up to the highest authority. We've improved our communications equipment. We have secure telephones that allow us to contact immediately the powers in the chain of command. And I, as the Joint Force Air Component Commander, have delegated emergency authority in the very rare occasion where either a telephone fails or we cannot get authority, and under emergency powers can exercise that authority. So the clearances now are in place. General Everhart is in place in Colorado Springs, or his designated representative. We exercise this in real world, not exercise, probably between 8 and 15 times a week. So it's been well documented. Any national security event will bring together the forces, and those lines of communication are open now. Clearances are there.
Thank you. As you know, our rules of engagement are many v1, so I will take a rest and let my colleagues go at you.
Thank you, sir. More questions. Commissioner Benveniste.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on this shoot-down authority, General Arnold, from what source did you receive the shoot-down authority?
I did not receive shoot-down authority.
You say it was received subsequent to the crash of 93?
Oh, yeah, that's correct.
From what source was that received?
It was passed down to us from the NORAD, from Cheyenne Mountain, that they had received shoot-down authority. And then, the time frame escapes me at the moment, but, for example, over the Washington, D.C. area, it was declared a no-fly zone. And just by the fact that any aircraft was present, if we could not determine that that aircraft was friendly, then we were cleared to shoot that aircraft down.
When was the declaration of no-fly zone authorized?
I don't know. It was shortly during that time frame.
So are you saying that that declaration gave you shoot-down authority?
No.
It
gave us that particular declaration that I am referring to as a Class Bravo airspace within the Washington, D.C. area was shut down to aviation, except for military or for law enforcement emergency response aircraft at that particular time.
To help me understand, does it mean once that condition exists that unless you were able to determine that this was a friendly aircraft, which under the circumstances I suppose means under the control of the terrorists at that time, making it unfriendly aircraft, that you had authority by
true,
whatever means to bring that down?
Yes.
At what time during this process was that order issued, and who issued it?
I do not know who issued it. It's my understanding it was issued by the President or the Vice President in his stead, that order was issued. And it was issued around the time that we decided to put all the aircraft on the ground, as Mr. Mineta, Secretary Mineta had referred to at that particular time. So,
we would ask you to supplement your testimony today with specific information about that. At what point was, to the best of your knowledge, any order received from either the President or the Vice President of the United States with respect to action to be taken by the military in connection with the ongoing situation?
it was my understanding that that occurred, the direct communication, to me. I can't answer if it was done at a higher level at some point in time around 5 minutes after the United 93 had crashed into Pennsylvania.
And so you would be able to check the records of NORAD generally or the DOD generally to find out when a presidential directive was issued?
I'm sure General McKinley will do that for me.
Thank you. And if I understand the context of what you've said about closing the perimeter around Washington, the President's directive or the Vice President's directive would have been moot because of the prior order which would have enabled you to shoot down an unfriendly plane in that sector.
Well, you know, we developed a certain, I guess the short answer again is correct. But it's very specifically in the Washington, D.C. area by presence. That aircraft was hostile unless we could determine that it was friendly.
Let me go to the issue again to revisit Flight 77, because as we understand it, tragically it appears that that was the only plane which reached its intended target, which might have been interdicted that day if everything had gone right. Are you in agreement with that?
I think, you know, from a physics perspective, yes, that's correct.
Well, let's go beyond physics for a moment, and let me ask you about the planes which were scrambled from Andrews Air Force Base. Now, from Andrews Air Force Base by the Secret Service of the United States. Who gave the order to scramble jets, F-16s also, I believe, out of Andrews?
My understanding that the FAA, that the Secret Service requested that they launch anything they could to get them airborne.
Of whom did they make that request?
I'm not sure if it's General Worley, Dave Worley himself. General Worley is the wing commander, General Dave Worley, and I think they actually talked to him. And I did not know this at the time, of course, but just in, they called him up and said, what do you have that you can get airborne? He had some airplanes returning from the range on training mission.
What would be the flight time from Andrews Air Force Base of two F-16s to the Pentagon?
From the time they were notified?
Yes.
Probably 15 to 20 minutes, because it takes about 10 minutes to get airborne, and they're not set up on alert or scrambled. In fact, it could have taken, didn't have any airplanes immediately ready to go, it could have taken them 20 to 30 minutes.
And under the circumstances...
We already had airplanes airborne. By the time those airplanes were airborne, we had airplanes over Washington, D.C.
Right. Now, if the order had been given to Andrews even simultaneously with the order that you gave to scramble your planes, is it not fair to say that those planes would have reached the Pentagon sooner?
They might have, but they would have been unarmed.
Sir, yes,
Right.
that would be my comment, sir, is those aircraft are not prepped or built up for that mission.
And in fact, we have received reports that are almost incredible in terms of the bravery of the two pilots who went up that day in unarmed aircraft with the mission, I presume, authorized somewhere in the executive to use their airplanes to bring down Flight 77 or 93 if they could interdict them. That means to clip their wings, crash into them, perhaps the pilots at the risk of their own lives. Is that correct?
Sir, as I evacuated the Pentagon that morning, as I came out the river entrance and looked up, virtually simultaneously, those F-16s coming back from the range had been airborne, had dropped their weapons, were returning low on fuel, were visible to 10 to 15,000 people, and it was a very heartening sight to see United States Air Force fighters overhead the Pentagon. And it is my understanding from the review of the records that that was their guidance.
And who provided that guidance to them? Was that a decision made internally by Secret Service, or did Secret Service require a higher executive order in order to launch those planes on that mission?
I do not know that.
I'm unaware of the answer to that, sir.
Chairman, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
One question. Suppose for a minute that this weekend, God forbid, that some terrorists got on board another plane in Boston and headed for New York. What would be different?
Sir, I'm very proud to say that I think the interagency process has worked very, very well. The Transportation Security Administration, under the direction of Secretary Ridge, has implemented stringent procedures on the ground. Let's face it, solving this problem before the terrorists get on the airplane, I think, is the most critical step to protecting commercial aviation. Because once the airplane is in the air, then it resolves back to the Department of Defense to take the appropriate action. So TSA deserves a great deal of credit. Federal Aviation Administration, with their procedures and the way they're lashed up with us now and the military, and the formation of the Northern Command, I think is vitally important to the security of the United States of America. And I think those things in context make it far less likely for this to happen. But as my boss says, we are not 100% safe. We can never be 100% safe. I take nothing for granted when I'm in our Air Operations Center when any aircraft fails to communicate or fails to make a turn or fails to do what its flight plan said it was supposed to. So we're very, very serious today about what's happening in the skies over America.
But if it were able to get into the air, headed for New York, would you be, what procedures exist now that didn't exist then, would you be able to intercept it?
It's my understanding and firm belief that the Federal Aviation Administration would immediately notify us at the first sign of any impropriety in any aircraft, whether it's commercial, cargo, or civilian. We would immediately take action to get our fighters airborne from the nearest suitable location. And we have that location set now where we didn't have it prior to the 11th. We should be able to protect our critical infrastructure, our major population centers, but there is, as in any case of a military effort, there are some risks, but we are postured to accept that responsibility. The example you gave us out of Boston is the F-15s out of Otis would be immediately scrambled. They would immediately intercept the aircraft, and we would stand by for further authorities from those above us.
I'd like to just point out that if the question were if they were happening today, you have airborne interceptors that would be vectored into those aircraft to intercept.
Commissioner Hamilton?
I just want to clarify a few things after listening to all this testimony. It's not all that clear to me. As of September 11th, only the President had the authority to order a shoot down of a commercial aircraft?
That's correct, sir.
And today, who has the authority?
We see the President delegated to the Secretary of Defense, delegated to the Combatant Commander of Northern Command and the North American Aerospace Command, and there are emergencies authorities if that fails.
So you have the authority?
Yes, sir, and others.
And how many others?
I'd prefer not to say in this forum, sir, but I can provide it for the record.
And you do not have to go up the chain of command at all in the event of a
We certainly will try. We will make every effort to try.
I'm sure you would, but you don't have to.
In an emergency situation, we can take appropriate action, yes, sir.
Now, one of the things that's curious to me, General Arnold, you said that you did not learn of the presidential order until after the United 93 had already crashed. That was about a little after 10 o'clock. in the morning. The first notice of difficulty here was at 8:20 in the morning when a transponder goes off on the American flight 11. I don't know how significant that is, but 20 minutes later, you had notification of a possible hijack. So there's a long lapse of time here between the time you are initially alerted and you receive the order that you could shoot that aircraft down. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
In your timeline, why don't you put in there when you were notified?
For which flight, sir?
Well,
we just
I mean,
told you
getting the notification from the President of the United States that you have the authority to shoot into commercial aircraft down is a pretty significant event. Why would that not be in your timeline?
I don't know when that happened.
Had you ever received that kind of a notice before?
Not to my knowledge.
So this was the first time in the history of the country that such an order had ever been given, so far as you know.
Yes, sir. I'm sure there's a log that would tell us that, and I appreciate the question.
Yeah. Maybe you could let us know that. And then finally, as I understand your testimony, it was not possible to shoot down any of these aircraft before they struck. Is that basically correct?
That is correct. In fact, the American Airlines 77, if we were to have arrived overhead at that particular point, I don't think that we would have shot that aircraft down.
Because?
Well, we had not been given authority to shoot
You
that
didn't have
aircraft.
authority at that point.
And, you know, it is through hindsight that we are certain that this was a coordinated attack upon the United States.
But had you gotten scrambled earlier, notified earlier of 77's deviance about when it turned east, for instance, certainly you could have got the F-16s there, and presumably there would have been time to communicate to either get or be denied authority, no, for 77.
I believe that to be true. I believe that to be true. It had to happen very fast, but I believe that to be true.
What efforts were made that day to contact the President to seek that authority?
I do not know.
Who would have been in the chain of command seeking authority from the President with whom anyone at NORAD was communicating with?
Can you answer that?
The command director in Cheyenne Mountain is connected with the combatant commander who would have had the telephone lines open at that point, but I don't have knowledge of what happened that day, but that would be the way it would be done.
The flow would be through the Secretary of Defense, obviously.
Well, the Secretary of Defense was under attack in the Pentagon.
He was evacuating, yes, sir.
Now, in terms of anything you know today, looking backwards, including all of the after-action reports and various studies which I'm sure have been conducted internally and I'm sure which we will wish to review, can you not tell us whether there was any effort made to contact the President to seek authority in dealing with what appeared to be a coordinated attack?
I don't have knowledge at this time to make a comment on that, sir.
I don't have knowledge of that. Our actions were to try to get aircraft in position to intercept if necessary.
Now, just going back, because now I'm confused by, on the one hand, your statement that the closing of the airspace over Washington provided de facto authority to take whatever measures were necessary to deal with hostile aircraft, and your statement that we probably would not have shot down 77 if we had arrived in time.
Airspace had not been shut down over Washington, D.C. at that time.
What time was that? Is that on the timeline?
I believe it is. I believe it was reported by Secretary Mineta, the timeline that occurred.
It's not on your timeline.
No, sir, it's not.
What do you know what time that was?
Sir, the only thing I've seen is we have a copy provided by General Worley of an Andrews Tower transmission that announced to all aviation traffic that the Class B airspace was closed and that air traffic that did not cooperate would be shot down.
What the time was that, Colonel Scott?
Sir, we'd have to go to the tower logs. We can get that for you. The tower log will show us what time that transmission was made, but I don't know what time it was made.
And on whose order was that directive given, that any plane in this sector would be shot down?
Unknown to me, sir.
Would you be able to provide that to the best of your abilities? From
We'll
your
do
own
everything we
records
can to provide that for the record, sir.
and from the higher authority as well?
Yes, sir.
So we can get on the record the chain of command during that period.
Yes, sir.
I have one last question on 175. It never turned its transponder off, and apparently you were never notified that it was a possible hijacking. Was that because it continued not to communicate with ATC, or did it deviate from its course?
I can't tell you why we were not notified. You'd have to ask the FAA, but that aircraft was a very, as I understand it, a fairly short flight. And we were not notified. I can't tell you why.
Commissioner Gorelick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd actually like to follow up on some of your questions about the respective roles of NORAD, Northern Command, the Defense Department generally vis-a-vis law enforcement. As Commissioner Benvenisti adverted to when I was at the Justice Department and we were planning for the Atlanta Olympics, we rehearsed a number of scenarios with the Defense Department and the various components thereof who were responsible for providing support to the Olympics. And when we got to the scenario of a domestic hijacking of a plane headed into a stadium, and I asked what they thought the proper division of labor should be, I was told, and it won't come as any surprise to you, General Arnold, given your testimony, that this is a law enforcement matter and that the armed services would provide technical support to the FBI to shoot the aircraft down. And my response, of course, was, that's preposterous. And in fact, General Arnold, I am glad to see that and hear that when faced with the judgment of whether you should do your job in defending the United States or wait for someone from the FBI to call you, you decided to get the authority later, because that is the only rational response. Probably could have gotten you court-martialed, but one appreciates that sort of leadership. I say this because it is clear that before September 11th, we know that the Defense Department discussed for decades what the appropriate role of our military should be in defending the domestic United States. This was not a new question. It was discussed up and down and across, and I see General McKinley nodding. Anyone who has been in the service for the period of time that you gentlemen have been know that. And clearly, September 11th served, if anything else, if nothing else, to break the resistance that had occurred to having a different view of what the appropriate role of the military should be. So with that, with that background, I would like to just be very clear as to what has changed and what has not. As I understand it, the requirement of prior law enforcement request has been eliminated. Is that correct?
We are able, under Operation Noble Eagle, which we are under presently, to respond to an event as a military entity, to be in position to support. We don't, as you said eloquently, we don't have time to wait anymore to launch our fighters. So we have to take proactive action to do that.
Thank you for that. And second of all, your radars are now, as you put it, are pointed inward as well. Is that correct?
We have incorporated the radars that were there all along so that our military controllers can now see them, see those tracks of interest.
You remain reliant to a certain extent on the efficacy of the FAA's radar system, as Secretary Lehman pointed out. Are you completely comfortable that they are more than adequate to your mission?
Ma'am, you're absolutely right. We are dependent upon the FAA. We are working closely with them and their programmers because there are some financial disconnects. The FAA looks at radar differently than the military does. They are optimizing their radar to control traffic for commerce. We, the military, need to see very specific data, which the FAA doesn't need. It costs money to do that. Our programmers, along with the FAA, have identified some disconnects in programmatics. And senior leadership is aware of those disconnects. We want to make sure the radars last so that this mission can be done properly and effectively.
I would ask you to supply for the record, if you could, a statement of what would be necessary in the professional opinion of you and your colleagues to bring the FAA system, upon which you are now reliant, up to the standards that you think are required to defend the domestic United States.
Yes, ma'am.
The other issue which you've raised in your testimony is that of communication between the FAA and NORAD, or lack thereof. And one of the questions that came immediately to mind is why you would not be co-located with FAA so that there is no such communication issue. Are you now co-located with FAA and have a presence in its command center that opens up when there is an emergency?
Ma'am, we've done a little of both. We after General Arnold had this tragedy occur on the 11th, the FAA provided us with liaisons at all our air defense sectors, in our continental NORAD region, and at NORAD. So we have real-time people that we can turn to and say, please use your communications channels so that we can get information. In addition, the National Capital Region has stood up a coordination center at Herndon, Virginia, in the FAA building, where we have military personnel, members of Transportation Security, Secret Service, and other federal agencies where they can coordinate the efforts in this area. So that has helped us tremendously, and we think we can continue to do that.
Thank you for that answer. And finally, in my list, are you comfortable that you now have the pre-placement of your resources in terms of aircraft, et cetera, where they need to be to adequately defend our critical infrastructure in the United States?
Yes, ma'am. I believe at the present time we have an adequate force structure to do that. The requirements change daily, weekly, based on the event. For example, if a space shuttle were to take off, we'd want to have aircraft at the Cape. So whenever we have a security event, the Olympics, the State of the Union, we move our fighters around in a flexible manner to respond to that. So we do have the capability, based on intelligence and real-world need, to do that.
We may want to follow up in closed session on that issue. As the charter for NORAD and the existence of Northern Command were being changed and created, there clearly would have been debate within the Pentagon over what the scope of that charter should be. And I speak as someone who served there twice, and I can imagine what some of those discussions might have been. What authorities were contemplated to be given to Northern Command that haven't been? And what authorities, if you were writing that charter on your own, would you give it?
Well, ma'am, I don't mean to dodge the question, but I don't know if I have the level of knowledge that you require for that answer. I will tell you, as a component commander who needs to employ resources in defense of United States citizens, I will tell you that the binational arrangement with Canada that NORAD has had for over 40 years has worked exceptionally well for the threat period that we went through, the Cold War, and subsequently. The stand-up of Northern Command has given us the ability to now tailor our forces and to work with local law enforcement so that we can respond to a critical need far more quickly, and we do it in a joint fashion with Navy, Marine Corps, Army, our Guardsmen, our Reservists, and our United States Air Force. So the Northern Command framework, as I see it, and we're still in initial operating capability, will become fully operational capable when General Abarch says that they are. We are learning, we are training together and exercising together, and from my perspective, working exceedingly well.
And one final question, General Arnold. We get some of our most candid advice from people who have taken their uniform off. And I use that phrase as well for civilians who no longer play whatever role they happen to have played. Having lived through the searing moments of 9/11, and having had the awesome responsibilities that you had on that day, and having had limited resources as you had in that day, legal and physical, to help prevent harm, what advice do you have for us about changes that we should make as a country?
Well, I wrote a paper. No, I didn't write a paper on that. But I think one would have to. That is probably where you're going to go. We're very fortunate that we have a country with so many resources. And let me point out, if I could, while there could be criticism of what we did in response, it worked pretty well in terms of the after-action reports. Airplanes were getting airborne because people knew they had to get airborne. And I don't have the timelines for all of these things, but as the President told the military to prepare to defend the country, we started gathering up all the aircraft that traditionally had not supported NORAD. And as soon as we could get armament to them, we either put them on orbit. As you recall, we were on orbit for some time throughout the country. The Navy responded magnificently as well. It was in the press. I had Admiral Dawson, Vice Admiral Dawson, called me. He was on the George Washington at the time, and he said, we understand that General Everhart is a supported SINC and that you have been appointed the JFAC, the Joint Force Air Component Commander, and we want to roll under your air tasking order. I had Vice Admiral Bucky of the 3rd Fleet, who was steaming the aircraft carrier towards the West Coast to do the same thing. So the system in terms of military cooperation worked tremendously well. I would also hasten to say that during the course of time as we were on orbit and our resources were extremely limited in many cases because we initially could not see even what the FAA could see, we used our very strained AWACS aircraft, our warning aircraft that are used all over the world. And Brigadier General Ben Robinson was stretched very thin, but he continued to do what he could. The United States Customs provided us with E3s with radars that gave us coverage in other parts of the area. And as General McKinley alluded to, we were able to bring in units, Air National Guard and active duty theater air control units that are designed to be deployed, and integrate them into our air picture, not only for air, but also for voice. So we did a lot of things early on, but the things that were missing, in particular, immediately were, number one, we couldn't see into the interior of the country. We couldn't talk to our aircraft that were airborne to the interior of the country. And we did not have a command and control system that would absorb the number of radars. And we were able to do that very rapidly. That coupled with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and with the Northern Command has provided defense in depth to, in my opinion, to protect this country in a way that it has never been defended before. It's in depth at the present time. So it's we need to continue down those avenues. I'm sure there are ways to improve it. I'm sure that General McKinley will find those ways. General Eberhart is engaged in that as well. But I feel comfortable that we have done those things that we ought to have done in order to provide security before a certain hijacking would occur. And of course, God forbid, if that were to occur again, we are now positioned to be able to see, to be able to talk, to be able to provide command and control, and we have exercised repeatedly our capability to pass an order, a military order, down to the pilot on in the airplane or the soldier next to his air defense artillery.
Thank you very much.
Our last questioner is Congressman Roma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to again commend you and our Vice Chairman and the staff for all the work that you put into this hearing, especially this panel. This is very helpful to us, and plowing ground that the joint inquiry did not get into. And I just want to make sure that you recognize how important that is, and we're very grateful for your time, gentlemen, and your help and the good work that's gone into setting this hearing up. General Arnold, you were there that day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had been there how long?
I'd been a commander since December the 19th, 1997, so I've been there for some time. I was approaching the end of my tour.
Let me keep you on the hot seat as Jamie Gorelick has put you there, and ask you a question about military threats to the United States, and the way we try to get intelligence as the world changes from a Cold War to terrorist threats that can come at us from almost anywhere at any time in nimble, quick, dynamic ways. Were you aware at all of the fatwa that Osama bin Laden had put out in February of 1998 that said that he wanted to kill Americans, all Americans, everywhere he could, whether that was in the Middle East or in the United States of America?
The answer to that is yes, and we had briefings that, our own briefings, I think we could even provide a date back to 1998 where we called Osama bin Laden the most dangerous man in the world. And our focus for the demise of the Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact, in accordance with the Hart-Rudman study, was that we felt like the greatest threat to the United States would come from a terrorist, a rogue, or a rogue nation, or I should say a nation of concern.
And then were you aware of George Tenet's statement in December of 1998 that the United States was at war with Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda?
I don't recall that, but I suppose I was generally aware of that the United States was at war with terrorism around the world.
One of the frustrations is that in looking at this issue very carefully over the last year and a half, that a lot of our people responsible for these kinds of things did not know of George Tenet's declaration or did not know of Osama bin Laden's declaration. If Vladimir Putin had made that declaration as the leader of a nation state, we would probably all be aware of it. If Kim Il-jung of North Korea or Saddam Hussein had made those statements in '98, we would probably all be aware of it. And that combined with the intelligence that was coming in over the decade of the 1990s that pointed to planes as weapons, we need to look back not to blame anybody, but to try to make sure that this kind of information can get into the right hands in the future so that we can respond nimbly and quickly to this very nimble and quick threat that is directed directly at the heart of America. And I would be very, very attentive to any suggestions you would have now that you've stepped away from that most important job that you took on for our country and for our people and performed very well, I'm sure. What do we need to do to break down these barriers of communication and increase the exchange of information so that we can respond quickly to this threat that will continue to come at us.
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, I think I've stated that earlier, what I thought we have done in terms of the intelligence community and awareness. I think we are at a greater awareness today than we ever were before. I would leave that up to perhaps General McKinley, not trying to duck the question, but I think I've answered that pretty much before.
Well, if you think of more specific answers, please provide those for the record. Let me ask you a question about the time difference between the scrambling and the battle stations and getting airborne. The F-15s at Otis, which was about, what was the total time frame there for the F-15s at Otis?
I believe that from the time they were notified to scramble, it was 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Notified, scrambled, and then airborne.
Notified, scrambled, and airborne. I believe that was 6 minutes. Colonel Scott, is that?
So a total of.
Are you not talking of? Now they were on battle stations,
right?
Because the Northeast Air Commander had put them on battle stations. But once we said scramble them, I believe it was 6 minutes.
And then, comparatively, for the F-16s at Langley, what was the total time it took to?
Again, if I can look at our data here, I believe it was, they were reported airborne at 9:35, and I think we would show that we actually.
We got first radar data at 9:30. I believe they were ordered to scramble at 9:24. The 9:35 report is
correct
when they were reported to have been airborne.
6 minutes.
6 minutes again.
And these fighters, sir, have up to 15 minutes to get airborne. And it's very intricate, as Secretary Lehman knows, to get an airplane without anybody in it started, cranked, inertial line to the runway, get a clearance, get in the air. The 6 minutes is exceedingly quick.
So at 9:35, those F-16s are airborne.
They were airborne.
I think they were airborne at 9:30,
9:30.
actually, and they were reported airborne at 35. I correct my error here if I could, please.
Okay. You were in the room when Secretary Mineta talked a little bit about arriving at the White House at about 9:20, and then overhearing a conversation at about 9:24, 9:25 between the Vice President and a young aide, where he inferred that there was already an order in place for a shoot down, and he assumed it was for American Airlines 77. So sometime even before 9:20, there was an order in place that he overheard in the Presidential Executive Operations Center that had some exchange between, I assume, the Vice President, the President, and maybe the Special Ops, the Situation Room, and they had determined that they would have the authority communicated to somebody to shoot down American Airlines Flight 77. Were you at all aware of anything sometime after 9:15 or 9:20 to shoot down American Airlines Flight 77?
I was never aware of any order given to shoot down American Airlines 77.
So nothing was ever conveyed to you by the White House or by the FAA administrator or by the Secretary of Transportation on Flight 77?
That's correct.
So the only time that you ever received information on a shoot down was on flight number 93, and that was
after the fact.
That was, excuse me?
After the fact.
That was after the fact, and that was after 10 o'clock.
That's correct.
And that was from who?
It was from Cheyenne Mountain, I assume from the commander of North American Air Defense Command.
Your assumption is that the White House communicated that to Cheyenne Mountain, and then Cheyenne Mountain communicated
through
that
the
to
National Military Command Center. Right.
And when you had that after the fact, as Commissioner Hamilton asked you, that was at what time?
I believe the time, we do not have a record in this. I remember the time being somewhere around 10:05, but we do not show that in this.
And we'll try to find that accurately and depicted for the record, sir, because that's probably an important time you'd like to have.
I think it's critically important. Colonel Scott, were you in on any of that information about the presidential authority to shoot down Flight 93?
No, sir. At the time, I was upstairs with the crisis action team.
And General McKinley?
I was trying to get out of the Pentagon, which was on fire, sir.
So, General Arnold, with respect to this decision, if you can get any more details on the timing and any information on Flight 77, that would be very helpful to us. Thank you again for your great service to the country.
Colonel Scott, Major General Arnold, and Major General McKinley, thank you very much. You've been very helpful today. We appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Thank you very much.
Lieutenant General Canavan. Next.
Terrific job. Oh, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. I need to coordinate this. I heard yours.
See one of the other questioners. Sure.
Yeah, let's do that. And we can sit over the
Yeah, definitely.
That was on the
There's no break. Yes, yes. Yes, in the conference room at K Street. These in the, I don't know.
I was at the Air Force docking, sir. Before I went.
that's all right.
March of 95. Libyan farm, and all that. And it was a very active DC team. They got ahead of us. We'll exchange information. Thank you, sir. If I can find a card.
The Canadian, they killed the Canadian ones because they're afraid they'd use that pre-tip to attack her.
I'm not sure that. Let me write it down. Yeah, let me just write it down.
Military comment. So glad to do that.
It's my fault.
Yes, we met earlier.
I think possibly that my card was working. I just couldn't see the lights were going on. Yeah. So the light, you just got to go and trust it.